Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join today's session. It looks like we've still got a few folks joining here, so we're going to give it probably another 60 seconds and then we'll kick off. All right, let's go ahead and dive in here. So thanks again to everybody for joining today. Really excited about today's topic. It is an area where I think we have seen, at least, a lot of Azure customers aren't really aware of the change that's about to happen, and more specifically, if they are aware, how it's going to affect them. So we're going to take the next 45 minutes to dive into that a little bit. In terms of an agenda, I'm really excited about the speaker that we have joining us. Is a former colleague of mine from Microsoft. We'll hear from him and understand better on what's actually changing inside of Azure. We'll talk a little bit about what this means for you in the average enterprise, how ISVs can help you. We'll talk a little bit about the Aviatrix solution and how that can help. We'll summarize sort of the key takeaways, and then we'll end with some Q&A. We will be taking questions throughout the session. There's a Q&A portal that you can dump your questions into. We will do our best at the end of this to answer some of those live, but we have some moderators as well who will be keeping an eye on that. So keep those questions coming. We'll queue them up to be able to address them at the end. So in terms of the talking heads for today, my name is Bryan Ashley. I head up product marketing here at Aviatrix. I've been here for 5 years. We spend a lot of time talking with customers who are trying to build enterprise applications and footprints inside of the major public clouds. And I am very excited about our guest, Daniel Mauser from Microsoft. I had the pleasure 5 years ago, actually before joining Aviatrix, I was at Microsoft myself, and Daniel was a colleague of mine. So Daniel, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Very grateful to be here with you and share my experience with the audience on this challenging upcoming change that's coming for outbound access. So my name is Daniel Mauser. I'm an Azure Network Solution Specialist. Been in Microsoft for about almost 18 years. And I hope to come here, share my experience with the customers, clarify what the upcoming change is, bring some clarification as well and answer all the questions. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And for those who have not had the pleasure to work with an Azure Global Black Belt before, they effectively are the networking ninjas inside of Microsoft. Chief among them is Daniel, who's been doing it for a really long time. So all of your really hard, challenging networking questions, feel free to direct them to Daniel. And if you ever have the opportunity to work with him, he's just an incredible resource. So Daniel, let's talk a little bit about this change. For those who may not be familiar, what this screenshot is on the right is Azure Updates. Azure Updates is a great way for enterprise customers who are in Azure to get the latest news on what's changing inside of the environments. And for those of you who may not be familiar, this is a system where you can you can join the list and get notifications on everything that's coming. So highly recommend that for anybody who has an Azure footprint. But Daniel, the original announcement about default outbound access changing was September of 2023. There's some language that was included in there about, hey, we're moving to a more secure by default model. Then there were some additional updates that have trickled out over the years. I know when we've talked to customers, we were at Ignite last year, and unfortunately, a lot of customers weren't aware that anything was changing. But of those who were, there were still some uncertainty about how they might be affected. What of those workloads were going to be affected? What changes did they need to take to make sure that they were protected? And really, why was Azure even making this change at all? So can you just sort of walk us through, starting at sort of the basics on, why is this important? Why is Microsoft making some of these changes?
Yeah, so maybe the audience is already familiar. Microsoft has started in the end of 23 initiative called Secure Future Initiative, which the main goal is to stop, review all the internal process that we have, all the products, and make sure we can focus on security. And the main, I would say, foundations for this security initiative is security by design, which means we're going to review our internal processes, how we design our products, and make sure we can deliver them securely for our customers. The second pillar is the security by default, which ties with the change that we're talking about here, right? As we move in terms of the evolution of the threat landscaping, and also what Azure offered in the past, and based on history, right? One of the main points is that we are incorporating into this security initiative, specifically for networking. And if you take a look on and the audience can do a search afterwards, we do have a latest update of this initiative last November. And we kind of, in terms of accountability, we lay out what we've been doing. And networking, it's one of the pillars. I would say we have 6 total. Network is the third pillar. And that change for the secure outbound access, it's something that is not ideal from a security perspective. And we want to make sure we accommodate that security by default. And the main point is, we want to clarify here, and I want to answer those questions, is what is the default outbound access? So what happens is, when you provisioning, this is more tied to IaaS than technically PaaS or SaaS, which were the 2 types of that we can have in the cloud. So when you deploy on new VM, what happens is, even if you don't specify that VM doesn't have a public IP, Azure is going to provide you a virtual public IP by default, which means the machine is not accessible from outside in. But if you go open your browser and you type inside that VM, what's my IP, or curl if config.io, you're going to see that the machine is able to access the internet, and you're going to be able to see that Azure gave that virtual public IP. And as we know, in terms of security, that's not ideal, because as the security threats, they evolved, right? They are not just, the firewall is not just inspecting, the classic firewall, just inspecting what is coming in from the internet to the inside, but also the security threats are also leveraging a lot outbound access. And that's one of the main reasons why we are kind of cutting over that Azure provided, or what we called explicit outbound access.
Okay, and Daniel, so let me try to summarize that, just so I make sure that I understand it and the attendees here understand it. So effectively, it's primarily targeted at, or this is primarily used in IaaS. When you spin up a new VM, then if you don't take any action whatsoever, that VM is automatically going to have internet access. That effectively is what default outbound access is.
That's correct.
And okay, and then the change effectively is we're saying we see the gaps there and why that could be a security concern. And so now, instead of that default behavior happening, a customer will have to take some action, which we'll talk through, but we'll have to take some action to provide internet access in the future.
That's correct.
Got it.
So
okay.
what we're moving from is from that implicit Microsoft or Azure provided public IP. And I want to make sure the audience understand this change that's coming. It's going to affect only new deployments after the target date, which is September 30th this year. Which means if you are leveraging today your workload, you're not going to be affected. Only new deployments.
Perfect. Okay.
And another point is, so two basically types of IaaS deployments that we have, right? So we have the single VM deployment and the VM scale set. So VM scale set, today, when you go to the portal, you have two types of orchestrations. One is called uniform, and the other one, which is the classic, and we have a new offering called flexible. So that flexible orchestration already disables the outbound access. The classic one, with the uniform orchestration, leverages also the default outbound access. So, in this case, if you're doing flexible today, you're going to have already have the default outbound access disabled for those flexible deployments. And one thing that we're going to cover, and I'm going to just move to the next slide because we have a better illustration how that implicit or Azure provided VIP works, is the top diagram, which means I spin up a VM, I get this Azure provided VIP, and I'm going to be able to access the internet. Obviously, you can, if the customer today, even if the Azure is given, and if today you have a firewall, or if you have a use-defined route that is actually shifting the traffic over a firewall or NVA, you are not, although it's behind the scenes, your traffic is not leveraging it. So if your environment today, it's using that type of setup already secure with the explicit, what we call explicit access, you're not technically leveraging it. And which means you're going to be, if you want to, after the September 30th, what happens is, if you want to have that type of access natively, you have to leverage one of those three options that we have in the screen, which we call explicit outbound access, which means you have the options to assign a public IP directly. So keep in mind that on the implicit scenario, it's Microsoft managed. You don't know, you don't manage that public IP. You don't have visibility other than if you kind of do the what's my IP or curl to know what it is. Also, another highlight is that VIP may be shared by multiple VMs in the same VNet. So, which means if you install like 5 VMs, they may be using the same exact IP. So it's not unique. There is other side effect also on that Azure provided is if you stop and deallocate the VM, right? It may change because that VIP is Microsoft managed, is ephemeral. So there's other impacts just beyond security that actually can cause the disruption on the workload. With the explicit one, which is the first option, is the public IP. You create the public IP in your subscription. So you manage, there is a customer managed public IP, and you can assign to the VM. In this case, obviously, you have to put also the other built-in security options, which is like NSGs, right? In order to lock down the security in any one of those options. The second option would be if you have a load balancer. Load balancer, you can obviously assign external load balancer public IP or public IP prefix. And you can leverage also what we call outbound rules. And I'm going to dig a little bit more when I'm talking about the third option, which is the NAT gateway. So the NAT gateway is a SNAT solution. We're going to allocate the public IP or public IP prefix, but the goal of the NAT gateway is just outbound only, right? The public load balancer, you can do both. You can do in and out, and the goal of the NAT gateway is outbound only. And the question is, for example, which one it's better in terms of, because I mean, it's just not the security, but also we do have other performance considerations that you need to account for this type of allocation, which is the SNAP port allocation. Obviously, if you assign a public IP in a single VM, you're going to have the 65K SNAP ports available for that VM. But when you use the load balancer, that if you don't define an outbound rule, it's going to allocate by default per VM around 2024. And if you have an application that actually opens too many those ports, you can have a SNAP port exhaustion issue. You can make some fine tuning on the load balancer using the outbound rules, where you can predefine manually the number of SNATs. And the NAT gateway is the recommended solution because it's something that you don't have to deal with because we do the SNAT allocation dynamically. So that's talking about the connectivity piece, performance piece, and the security. You're going to rely on the natively Azure network security groups. And obviously, what we're going to bring to the audience here is they can also leverage any one of those explicit outbound access and add in the middle NVA or firewall to also leverage those and have the proper security centralized on those devices.
Perfect. So David, let me, again, I just want to summarize for everybody. That was a ton of really great information. So this change is coming. Customers will need to take some action. There was actually a clarifying question in the chat. So you said this change is only going to apply for new deployments. Does that mean new VNets? Does that mean new VMs? What does new deployments mean?
So that's a great question. So in that case, it's going to be new VNets, right? Because the today, you as a customer, you can kind of emulate what the changes, how the change is going to be. And we do have a feature, which we do have in our link on the references by the end of this, which is the main documentation for outbound access. We do have the private subnet feature, which that is an attribute that you can place today, that you can change to outbound access to false, which is going to kind of emulate the same behavior that we put in place on the September 2025, the September this year. And which means that's a VNet level. If you provisioning that in an existing VNet or today, you are going to, so that's actually, it's a subnet. Let me kind of kind of because inside the VNet you have subnets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a subnet level attribute. It's not a VNet level. Just let me just rephrase here.
Got it.
Which means,
okay.
So if you have an existing subnet today and you add a new VM, even after 2025, September 30th, is not going to affect it. New subnets created in the VNet are going to have that disabled by default. Make sense?
So yeah, totally. So all right. So the customers will have to make it, in preparation for this. It will apply to new subnets that are created or new VNets that are created. There is an option for them to be able to test this with the private subnet flag. But effectively, they need to make a change to what they're doing today in defining some sort of explicit outbound access. And we have a couple of options for doing that. We can add a public IP to our virtual machines. There's pros and cons there. There's load balancers, again, pros and cons but that gives us bidirectional. And then we can use the NAT gateway, which is a SNAT solution, the preferred recommendation from Microsoft. Is that a correct summary?
That's correct summary. Yeah.
Okay.
Just keep in mind also is really rare, I would say, customers like in an enterprise level today they have some sort of kind of inspection for outbound, right? Which means usually if you today are redirecting all your traffic to a firewall, you're not going to get affected at all because you already send your traffic to your NVA.
Yeah, perfect. Well, and that's actually, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to highlight another common question is how about like PaaS, right? So because so the target here is ISVMs mainly, but we do have some scenarios with PaaS. They are kind of PaaS, they are like VNet integrated. So technically, when you're talking about, for example, a storage account, so storage account, usually the PaaS solutions by design, they kind of get public facing. They are public facing, they are public endpoints. Obviously, you can lock that down using private link. But we do have other solutions that are VNet integrated, right? We can have web apps or app services VNet integrated. You can have other solutions that are PaaS, but are private only, like SQL management instances. So the goal here is on those specific ones that are VNet integrated, they should follow the same routing path as I would say, just check with your respective PaaS solution, but they should not get affected by this outbound access, because what happens is even if the PaaS solution has some sort of public IP, they're not getting leveraged by outbound access per se in general. They may be being leveraged by the more like a control plane perspective, which is used only internally at Microsoft. When you, for example, you spin up like a new VPN gateway, a new express route gateway, which usually is private only, right? But it has this public IP. That public IP, it's kind of already locked down for the control plane inside the Microsoft backbone. It's not like widely open to the internet, so it's not going to get impacted. Those by solutions.
Okay, so predominantly affects IaaS workloads, but PaaS workloads shouldn't be affected, but it's still worth checking in with your respective Azure resource to just confirm that we're not going to see any impact to any VNet integrated services.
That's correct.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, so you touched on something that I want to spend some time on, because we also see this from some of the conversations we're having with Azure customers who are trying to get ready for some of this change. And it's really about, okay, while I can start to stitch some additional pieces together to gain some visibility and some additional security, you mentioned the centralized approach, and those folks are kind of already covered, right? If they're already using a centralized firewall today and they're routing all of that traffic through it, then you don't necessarily need to be as concerned about this compelling issue because you're probably not leveraging any kind of default outbound motions. One of the things that we have seen, though, is that it's very common for some developers who are spinning up testbed environments or sandbox environments to leverage these kind of deployment mechanisms. And we've heard from some of the security folks that they're concerned about, while they need to be able to support that motion so that developers can have agility and spin up things very quickly, they struggle with being able to understand, what traffic is egressing there and how they can protect that. You talked a little bit about this with the ability to attach NSGs to some of these solutions. Can you just kind of briefly describe what that looks like? Like, how can you add a security element to, say, the load balancer, the public IP, or the NAT gateway?
Yeah, so what we expect customers is, so you have the options, right? So one of the goals is to give the native options to consume the explicit outbound access options, public IP, load balancer, NAT gateway. But the main point is what we see customers is on the enterprise level, they want to some sort of like extra layer of inspection. And that's where we can bring solutions. You can rely on the network security groups, as I mentioned earlier. But the goal is to how can we integrate with bring things to the next level, right? Which means we're going to bring the devices, they're going to be in front of it. And that's what we rely on, based on the customer requirements. If they're okay with the native one, we can kind of offer some visibility, the NetFlow logs. But some of the demands also required for third-party, because that's the main point, right? So the point is we delivered, like, I would say, the good, but the extra layer, that's what that sometimes we don't provide. It's going to be most based on the customer taste or customer requirements, and that's what we can bring in partners, right? To be in this scope of now between my workloads and leveraging those explicit outbound access, have the proper visibility, security, and that's when we bring in those partners to integrate with our solutions.
Got it. Yeah, and I think that's consistent with what we see as we're talking to customers as well. I mean, while there's a level of protection that can be provided by some of the native services, as a practical example, when you look at that at scale from sort of, say, the NSG approach, there can be some operational complexity for kind of managing that at scale. And then when you look across, as you sort of mentioned, it is a very heterogeneous environment. We have IaaS, we have different types of paths, we have private endpoints that may be in the mix, right? It's a very mixed landscape. And so just trying to figure out how do I manage all of that, can be challenging. Obviously, Aviatrix also sees a lot of multi-cloud customers as well. And so that's sort of a whole other angle of how that, if you're trying to get holistic coverage, what that looks like. The other piece, which I think you also started to touch on, was sort of some of the regulatory, and corporate security requirements. I know we've had some stuff in the news recently about, recent attacks like Salt Typhoon and everything else, which are sort of mandating, some of these traditional sort of cemented frameworks like NIST and CISA or HIPAA to be updated. But we see a lot of the sort of traditional enterprise regulatory standards really trying to sort of beef up that egress security because the threat landscape is changing. So that's super helpful in just sort of understanding that. And I think that aligns to what we see. So what I wanted to go now, Daniel, was really just very practical and to kind of look at our different options across, the public IP, the load balancer, NAT gateways. And I added one more with Azure Firewall, just to show that that's another solution here. But sort of talk through, and just sort of talk through the pros and cons so that everybody understands kind of, where we're at. And so, if I look at, as an example at the public IP, you've talked a little bit about in your documentation, it talked about, obviously you got to think about scale here. If you're going to throw a public IP on every single workload, that can be a little bit challenging. In terms of security enforcement, there's nothing sort of natively with that public IP, but you can augment it, or you would need to augment it with some of the security groups that are there. And then you briefly talked a little bit about, again, doesn't natively come with any visibility, but you could leverage like NSG flow logs and a few other tools to consolidate those and get some visibility. Is that, do I have that right?
Yeah, you have that correct. Yeah, you got it right.
Okay, perfect. All right, so then we've got our load balancer, which our load balancer, one of the advantages there is that we can get bidirectional communication. So we can do both outbound and receive inbound, which is great. A challenge there is we do have to pre-configure the scale a little bit more. So it's a little bit better than the public IP, but we've got to be conscious of how much we're going to scale. And same thing sort of apply for the security and visibility. We can use the NSGs to tack on some additional security, and we can leverage NSG flow logs as well to get the visibility, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And one thing I did want to point out here, or really ask, is, again, just so I think people have clarity, in this diagram, right, we've got, some paths starting to weave its way in here. So are any of these options, be it the public IPs, the load balancers, the Azure NAT gateway, we don't necessarily have to be concerned about the PaaS instances that are running in there, other than just, making sure that we connect with our Azure representative and to ensure that the PaaS won't be affected. Are there any other limitations that we should be aware of if we're running PaaS for any of these options?
No, I don't think so. Like I mentioned, the expectation for the PaaS is from a control plane perspective, and it should not be affected. Okay. It's not going to be affected. Mainly ISVMs.
Got it.
Yeah, that would be my take here. With that VNet integrated solutions, right? PaaS. In a sense where you leveraging VNet injected, VNet in solutions like the example I gave for SQL management instances, or the solutions they are private PaaS solutions, private only.
Okay. The one piece that I know has been helpful for me when I've been talking to customers too, is when you are trying to add security to, and leverage the NSGs to get in there, the PaaS instances can often be, sort of a collection of different services. And so things like service tags can be really beneficial to manage access and security when it comes to those kind of services. Can you talk a little bit, just in case people aren't familiar with what service tags are and how they might be used in a security sense?
Yeah, the security, if you making, for example, calls and you want to use like a native, you can leverage on the UDR side, the the SAP stacks because we support the routing explicitly. So which means on the public IP, but technically, so what's going to happen is I can't. So I'm just trying to visualize here the SAP tags on the. You can leverage on the NSG side where I can say, for example, I'm going to block internet, and I want to allow, for example, a SAP tag to access storage accounts only on the East-West. So you can technically do it. For the UDR, I think it's not a good example because the UDR needs to redirect to another device that's going to do the actual final access to the path, right? But I would say the NSG would be the way that you could kind of associating either one of the solutions and making sure you reduce the scope, right, of the access, what you need to access from the workloads.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's helpful. All right, so let's look at, so the preferred solution is the Azure NAT Gateway. We don't have to worry about scale. It's managed from Azure, which is great. I know that there is an additional cost here in terms of the sort of variable throughput that's going through that NAT Gateway. So that's something that customers need to just be aware of, right? It's just there's how much data you push through a NAT gateway matters. There's cost implications, and we're sort of in the same spot with the security enforcement and visibility. There's things that we can add to it to do some additional pieces, but it covers us in terms of scale, and everything else. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. Something that's totally accurate. I would say the only option here that we don't have data processing is the public IP, right?
Yep.
The load balancer, the NAT gateway, we do have the data processing. But I just want to highlight something that's important. If the customers, they want to, for example, okay, I need to access a passive resource. Now I need to add either load balancer or NAT gateway. I'm going to have the data processing. Is that in a way that I can mitigate the cost? I would say, yeah, that is an extra option that we can leverage. And you are familiar with this, which is SAP endpoints, right? So which means if you, at the VM level, if you enable SAP endpoints, behind the scenes, we're going to create like a tunnel from the VM straight to which is going to, in this case, bypass the explicit outbound access in this case, because the VM is going to access directly the pass resource. So in this case, one way that we could minimize that cost of data processing, I had a recent case where the customer was getting in this model a high charge over the load balancer, and one of the solutions was SAP endpoints.
Got it. Okay, no, that's great to know. So there's some architectural choices we can make that can help offset some of the costs imposed by some of these options. So, okay, great. All right, last option is the Azure firewall. Obviously, there's an additional cost component here that comes with that. And this is the one that sort of breaks our distributed model for the first time, right? That Azure firewall tends to be in some sort of shared services or in a hub of some kind. So we move away from sort of the distributed egress and more to that centralized egress. I did notice that, though, this is the first option, too, where we can start to pull some of those service tags that identify the Azure services into the policies. So, we can start to get some visibility. We can start to get some policy enforcement. From what I could tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the service tag component in a policy was still sort of an Azure CLI component. It wasn't necessarily built into the sort of GUI. Is that accurate, or are there ways to be able to do it?
The GUI.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Awesome. All right, so it helps us out a little bit. We can build the policies now by identifying some of those services, and we can start to get some of the visibility components in that centralized model.
Correct.
Awesome. Okay. Well, great. So now I want to be able to do, hopefully for the attendees, we've sort of covered, what needs to happen, what are some of those native options. So I wanted to spend the next, 10 minutes or so really talking about how ISVs can help. I know, Daniel, you mentioned, it's very common for enterprise customers and recognized within Microsoft, listen, we're going to move the ball to here. And if your enterprise requires additional features and functionality, that's why we have an ecosystem of partners to be able to help out. So for those who are maybe not familiar with Aviatrix, we've been partnered with Microsoft for a very, very long time. This is a snapshot of a case study that's in the partner library within Microsoft. Anybody can pull this up and see some of the ways that we've worked together over the years. We are consistently attending Microsoft events. We were at Ignite this past year. We had some partnership announcements around Intra and Copilot integration. But I wanted to kind of take that diagram that we were just looking at and see how Aviatrix might be able to help for those who might be curious or maybe new to Aviatrix. So just to sort of level set here, Aviatrix is available in the marketplace. We are a controller-driven system. It all lives inside of your tenant. As one deployment option, we do have another deployment option that can be run as a PaaS offering. But effectively, your data plane stays private. But we are a controller-driven system where customers can upload their subscriptions, and then we can do some orchestration of both native constructs as well as introduce software-defined overlays. To keep it really tightly focused on the problem that we're solving here, what Aviatrix is able to do is basically to insert a secure NAT gateway. It runs on top of Azure VMs with Aviatrix software on top to provide secure internet access for your workloads. These can be done very granularly, inserted across one VNet at a time where needed. But effectively, we can our goal is to provide the best of both worlds. We can provide the distributed enforcement with baked in visibility and control, while giving you centralized policy and governance over the entire estate. So when we, just very, very quickly go through what this looks like, each one of our gateways, which acts as that secure NAT gateway, has full NetFlow visibility into all of the traffic that is going through it. However, we can also summarize that into different kind of web groups or query for top talkers. We can build Sankey charts to show who's talking to what, get full domain lists on where everybody is communicating to. So full visibility into that platform. We do distributed enforcement. I'll show the screenshot of sort of the policy manager here, but one of the key components of this is, excuse me, it is centralized control, distributed enforcement, but only where those policies are needed. So we don't have to push the policies holistically across the estate. We can see where the relevant sources are and only push them to the secure NAT gateways that need them. Even if your gateways move, your workloads move around, we will automatically adjust the policies on the fly. As I sort of mentioned before, Aviatrix does deal with a lot of multi-cloud customers and challenges. So we do offer multi-cloud support so that you get consistency across Azure as well as some of the other cloud providers. And we also don't have any of the variable data charges. So similar to what Daniel was mentioning about kind of that workaround using service endpoints, we can eliminate some of that charges through some of our licensing and architectural choices. Now, all of this, importantly, is centrally managed. So it's the same look and feel if you're a security practitioner. It's very, very similar to a firewall. You feel like you're able to manage this from one place, but we push this control, the enforcement just out to all of the respective gateways. The other real advantage here that we see from customers is we often see a struggle between the developers who have this desire to move very, very quickly, or maybe they just, want to spin up an environment that's only going to be, be very short-lived. It's only going to live for a while. So they only need kind of temporary internet access. The last thing they want to have to do is go back to security and go through all of the governance to really understand, okay, well, for the short time that I need this, what policy do I need to put in place? What this allows us to do is allows the developers to continue to move at whatever speed they want to. Everything here can be deployed via infrastructure as code. We can tie into existing CI/CD pipelines so that they can just run. They can drive policy as code, so they can add any policies they want to. However, security still has a holistic view. They can still have complete governance over the entire estate while the developers are able to move ahead at speed. Couple more things that are sort of unique, and we've really based this on some of the challenges that we've seen with other enterprise customers trying to solve this problem, is the cloud's very dynamic, right? We've talked a little bit about, just as an example, that service tag capability inside an Azure NSG, which effectively is kind of an object that allows us to, identify certain components. Sorry, my slides are moving ahead on me. Just identify certain components in the estate dynamically. And so we do this today with something called smart groups. We're able to build tags based on groups of workloads and those properties. We can ingest CSP tags, or we can ingest properties of the VMs or workloads that are out there. We can also complement that with Kubernetes as well. For those of you who are going through app modernization efforts, looking to refactor legacy workloads into Kubernetes, that Kubernetes is kind of its own animal, right? We have new components like namespaces and pods and services that we have to deal with. And oftentimes, traditional mechanisms, both native and third party, don't really understand those native constructs. They don't know how to differentiate a namespace versus a service versus a pod. So our smart groups are able to absorb that information from your Kubernetes clusters and keep holistic egress policy sets across both IaaS and K8 environments. Lastly, we also are able to ingest some of the Azure service tags. So whether you're looking to control egress out to specific Azure regions or specific Azure services, we can embed that into our secure NAT gateways as well. So we can make it really easy for you to control all of that centrally. Again, centralized policy set, distributed enforcement, where we can push those things. Now, one practical component that we've noticed is that oftentimes for those customers who are aware that this change is coming, they're not quite sure if their footprint is using default outbound access anywhere. They acknowledge that perhaps there's some development work that's going on where default outbound access might be used, but they don't, they're unsure about what, landing zones or what BUs they need to go out and reach to address these things. So to try and help with that, the security NAT, the control plane for Aviatrix has an egress security score. Before you launch any of the software inside of your environment, you can onboard your accounts to the Aviatrix controller, and we'll start to give visibility into your entire footprint for every subscription that you onboard. And then we will calculate an egress score. We will look at, are you using centralized firewalls? Are you using NAT gateways? Are you using outbound access anywhere? And then give you a score. Now, the other key component our struggle that we've seen with customers in this space is, okay, that's great. You can help me identify it. But if I really want to enforce some policy, I've got to figure out what's allowed traffic and what I should be disallowing. What's good for the application and what's bad. And a lot of times that can be really, really hard. So we can turn these into monitor mode but we can also start to leverage some AI insights here to be able to do assisted policy discovery. We can do reporting on the traffic summary, and we can also do some AI assisted inventory, right? If we just want to use plain English to say, hey, is there anything in my prod environment or anything using this CSP tag, if you have certain tag structures that are using the NAT gateway or that have low security scores, we can sort of highlight that up to provide some, greater efficiency and time savings there. So again, thank you. Thank you for staying with me here. I know that, we're on the verge of this turning into a sales pitch, which I don't want this to be. This is really more highlighting how the Microsoft ecosystem can really augment a lot of the native services that are there. And so that you, as customers who are trying to solve these problems, understand what your options are. It makes a lot of sense to use some of those native solutions in a lot of scenarios. To Daniel's point, sometimes there are enterprises out there who just require a little bit more. Maybe you don't require that for the entirety of your environment. Maybe you only need it for a subsection of your production customer-facing workloads. Understand your options, understand what's available to you. Okay, so with that, Daniel, let's try to summarize this a little bit for everybody. I know we've covered a lot of grounds here, but what are some of the key takeaways for folks?
And I loved your last comment. I see, it's all about options, right? And we work together for many years, and we know that's our goal, to be like trusted advisors of the customers and do what the best for them. And our role here is to just show you the options. Yeah, so just to summarize, we're going to have this cut out on September 30th, 2025, where we're going to remove the explicit outbound access. And the goal here is obviously, because all this security initiative, future initiative that we have in Microsoft, we're kind of reviewing from the design perspective. I recommend you take a look on the latest report, because there is a lot of accountability there on the things that we are bringing in terms of security. And obviously what is not working today, that's the reason why we're removing that outbound access. That's the main reason. And yeah, that's in my goal here is, my message here is don't wait for the September, right? Try to test it, bring the, use the subnet, private subnet feature. We do have the documentation on the next slide, but I'm gonna just hand it over to Bryan to make the final remarks.
Yeah, no, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, and so guys, I'll just add to this and echo some of the stuff that Daniel was talking about, right? This change is coming. You want to get ahead of it. You don't want to wait. You don't want to get caught off guard, right? But understand your options here, because in some areas, this is a chance to uplift your security and visibility, right? And so you can really take the time to understand, look, okay, if we do need to make any kind of architectural change, what are the benefits that we can get out of this? How can we improve our security and governance and compliance? Or how can we ensure that we've got more holistic coverage? How can we, better understand the cost implications of some of these options, right? And, again, there's a broad ecosystem out there of solutions to help you. It makes a lot of sense to use native solutions in certain places, right? However, if you do need to augment those because of your enterprise requirements, understand what's out there. There's a lot of potential solutions. And I'll just make a plug for the GBBs and Daniel in particular. Look, I came from Daniel's seat. I was lucky enough to work alongside him. That's what those guys are there for. They are there to help you through these architectural changes and those challenges. So lean on them. That they're more than happy to help. Aviatrix is fortunate enough to have a few GBBs on staff as well. So we're also happy to help talk you through some of those scenarios and some of the alternatives that are there. Okay, thank you guys so much. I know it takes a lot for you to spend 45, 50 minutes with us and listen to a couple of talking heads here. Hopefully you got some value out of this. Daniel mentioned this before. We've got a couple of resources in here that are sort of the go-to place to understand what's happening with the Azure change. We'll send all of these out so that you guys can reference these. Just in closing, Daniel, we've had some great questions in the chat, but just want to highlight one or two of them. One was a question about the GBBs themselves. What is the best way to interact with the GBBs and get that kind of help?
I would say there is multiple ways. Feel free to reach me over LinkedIn if you have like a generic question. Obviously, but the correct way to engage GBB, we do have a process inside Microsoft. If you are a Microsoft customer, usually you can request your CSAM, which is the role of the Microsoft representation that works with the customer. Where they can engage us if you have like a complex, you wanted to discuss a deep dive more on the options that we discussed here, or do any kind of networking security review. We're happy to assist. And you can also connect with me over LinkedIn. I'll be happy to answer your question there as well.
Fantastic. All right, Daniel, I can't thank you enough, my friend. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, but I appreciate you taking the time as well to walk myself and the attendees through the upcoming changes. I know it'll be beneficial for everybody to try to get ahead of. For all of the attendees, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us. Hopefully you got something out of this. We will be sending, this recording will be made available. And we will be sending out some surveys and the slide deck as well for reference. Thanks so much for your time. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.